It's ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast. The multimedia program about minor league hockey talks with people involved in the Premier AA League. Issues, thoughts, and topics that matter, debated by on and off ice personnel from around the ECHL. ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast, brought to you by S Media, a communications content company driven by quality customer service. Find them at smedia.com. Now, ECHL Week Speak. Here's ECHL Week host, Barry Schickling.
Hi, welcome to another edition of ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast. This is your host, Barry Schickling. We're joined today by members of Team Sinbin. We'll talk a little bit about the details in a minute, but the people who are with us today are Matthew Harding, who hails from Wichita, Mike Campos from Lafayette, Louisiana, and Samantha Hoffman from Chicago. And in lieu of me giving the descriptions of all of their duties, let me just start with Matthew and have him tell you a little bit about what he does.
I'm everything but chief cook and bottle washer for the Sinbin. I'm the managing editor, also the ECHL editor. I co-host a pregame show in Wichita with Zach Quarter. We do that ahead of every Wichita Thunder game, provide coverage for the Wichita Thunder, do the In the Corners podcast with Bobby Metcalf of the Quad City Times. Also do the Inside the SPHL podcast with Mike Campos, and basically lead the direction of the website in content and where we want to go as a business. So basically, if there's something to be done on the website, my hands are in it.
And Mike is next.
Well, I am the chief cook and bottle washer at Team Sinbin. No, I am the editor for the SPHL, so I cover everything that goes on within the Southern Professional Hockey League. We have a couple of writers. We've got Jimmy Gentry in Fayetteville. We have Dawn Walters, who kind of roves around the league and does some feature pieces for us. Justin Reber in Evansville. And I do the Inside the SPHL podcast and write a couple of columns. And if there's any breaking news around the SPHL, I try to stay on top of it.
Samantha is next.
So I started initially with the Sinbin as the Chicago Wolves beat writer, and in addition to that, my role has kind of expanded recently as to taking over the social media editing. So just anything, especially the Instagram, which is at Sinbin Photos, taking all the game photos because we have photographers all over the ECHL, SPHL games, AHL games, and just giving them a home for their photos and just making sure that our brand that we establish through our content is extended to all of our social media platforms.
We should backtrack a little bit and just say that this Team Sinbin folks who are with us today is a little step aside from what we normally do. A lot of times we're speaking with people who are directly involved in the ECHL, whether they're on ice, off ice with the league or with teams. Team Sinbin is perhaps the most extensive group to cover minor league hockey in North America. They have writers and photographers in many American Hockey League cities, in ECHL cities, and in the Southern Professional Hockey League as well. And they are undertaking what I would say is an extremely aggressive and daunting task of trying to cover all those teams. And I can only imagine, knowing what I do, covering 27 for the ECH in the ECHL week, that when you are trying to get all those teams together, that's a lot of info and a lot of content, a lot of people coordinating that. Matthew, take us back just a little bit and give us kind of a brief synopsis of how this whole thing got started and where it's heading to right now.
Well, this all got started basically with in the old Central Hockey League with a website called Minor League Hockey Report. It was founded by Mike Finazzo, Zach Quarter, and myself. We ended up branching out and adding 3 more writers. And the goal of that was to give individualized team coverage. And when the CHL was absorbed by the ECHL in October 2014, that became that there was a need for 6 people to grow much larger, and we were ended up competing with Joe Rozicki, who is the owner of the Sin Bin in Kansas City, kind of competing information streams, and we decided in March of 2015 to combine forces, and so that's how the Sin Bin came to be. And since then, we've undergone a rapid expansion. I think we have 20 of 27 ECHL markets covered. We have 12 American League markets covered, and as Mike alluded to, we have 3 or 4 SPHL markets covered. So you're right, it is an aggressive platform. It is an aggressive strategy to cover most of the league. But I think what the Sin Bin has done is, through the work that we've put out there, it's made people, whether they're journalism school students or established bloggers, or even those who want to cut their teeth in sports journalism, come to us and learn with us and grow with us. And I think that's ultimately where we're going to go. Never mind the fact that we want to continue to be a resource for fans. So we definitely want to continue that growth, but there's always going to be holes to fill and things like that. So we're cognizant of the strategy that we have, and you're right, it is an aggressive strategy, and we'll hopefully continue to move forward with it.
Not only is it aggressive, I would call it daunting in terms.
It is daunting because it's you have to, there are information streams coming in from everywhere, and it is almost a second full-time job. If you are really in the trenches of this website, it is a full-time job. Mike, Samantha, and I have talked on a daily basis now for 6 weeks, planning our coverage here from Indianapolis. We've had team meetings every week since Christmas, and I've been on the phone with Brent Hollerud every week since Thanksgiving. So it's been a daunting task to try to manage all the information streams, plan coverage, and make sure that the content we continue to put out is better than the number of writers that we have. The mantra we've always had is quality over quantity, and that's the mantra we want to continue to uphold as we move forward.
Just to clarify Matthew's last statement, Brent Hollerud is in charge of media and public relations for the Indy Fuel. And as we record this, we're in Indianapolis at the ECHL All-Star event. Let's move a little more toward hockey itself now. And especially since we have Mike here who covers the Southern Professional Hockey League on a regular basis, and as we know, if you follow the ECHL at all, that right now, this time of year, there are a lot of guys who leave their SPHL teams and end up playing for the ECHL for some time, maybe for a long time, maybe for just a weekend. But since we're talking about the AA and A level of minor league hockey, let's talk a little bit about the types of issues that those leagues have in common, especially from a fan standpoint. So now that I've given you about 4 seconds to think about that, does any of you want to step forward and say, from a fan standpoint, what is it? What do those two leagues have in common that are issues that are significant right now?
Well,
Matthew,
I guess I would go ahead and say that the common denominator is call-ups. Every team in the ECHL is affected by him, and now you're seeing every team in the SPHL be affected by him. I think we did the math, and there are 42 players.
No, where have you been? No, where have you been, Harding? Right now, as of press time, or at least the last time that I've checked the transaction reports, we have had 70 individual call-ups involving 60 different players. And currently there are 47 SPHL players currently in the ECHL.
That's where I was going. So
right,
every team is affected by call-ups, whether you're in the ECHL or SPHL.
Right, it's every team, and there are in some cases where our Pensacola Ice Flyers and Peoria Rivermen, those guys have been hit especially hard. I think at last count, I think Pensacola has 7 guys in the ECHL. Gosh, I get my acronyms confused between the two, especially this weekend. And I think 6 Peoria Rivermen, there's 4 or 5 Mississippi River Kings, 3 or 4 or 5 Macon Mayhem players, just all over the place. And obviously the good teams get hit a little bit harder than the teams running behind in the standings. However, it's great for the players. They get great experience playing with these talented guys in the ECHL. And once call-up season ends and March comes around and these guys start trickling back to the league, they bring that experience with them, combined with the college kids that come in, which is another thing, too, when March comes around and you start seeing the college kids come in after they're finished their playing careers as well.
So the good news is, and I think both the leagues and all the teams involved particularly like the fact that their players are good enough one way or for one reason or another to be getting called up to a higher level, and that's something that they can really sell when they recruit players to come play for their teams. The flip side of that is, of course, fans who don't necessarily, some fans understand that, but a lot of fans don't understand that and say, we had a really good team and now all our guys got called up. But such is the nature of the tiered system in baseball as well, but also in hockey certainly, that you play well, you're going to move up to the next ladder, and that's good for you personally, it's good for your team, but for the fans who are following you and hoping that your team wins, that's not so good. You look like you want to say something, Samantha.
I think, but that's also something, especially with the ECHL and the affiliate system, that they can really leverage within the organization itself, because you're getting fans who build relationships with players, or they start to follow players, and they're going to follow them throughout their career. So, for example, in Wichita, a player gets called up, they're going to follow him, at the next level, and then if he's an Oiler, and it's a good way for teams to build their fan base, I think, not just from the immediate market around them, but that's how you can really grow your fan base across the country. And I think that's a really invaluable thing about the ECHL that a lot of people don't consider, that you're building these lifelong relationships with fans.
And one of the things that I think I don't know if I talk about this very often, but I think if you follow, as a fan, if you follow the ECHL enough, and I assume this would be the case in the SPHL as well, that one of the great things is that from a fan standpoint, these teams and these players are so approachable. Every team does a great job, whether it's skate with the players or autograph sessions or all those kind of being in the community things. In fact, we're going to a thing later on today in Indianapolis where the All-Stars are going to be there, and they're going to be taking selfies and signing autographs with all the fans who paid their few dollars to come in and watch and see the Stanley Cup and the Kelly Cup and all those other things. And that, if you just, if you're into that, and I think a lot of people can be, because it's what sets minor league sports, specifically the ECHL and SPHL, apart from major league sports, is that these people and these athletes are so approachable, and then in a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, you can say, when that guy is playing at the highest level, say, I met him. He was a real nice guy.
Yeah, that is, to me, what is different than minor league hockey 3 years ago, at least in the Central Hockey League, where you had players who were on the way down and, for lack of a better phrase, checking out on a career, and they were just there to get a paycheck and maybe ride the iron lung one more time for sentimental reasons. Here, it's these players are on the way up. You have coaches who are wanting to develop them. Malcolm Cameron is a really great example in Wichita of taking players like a Jamie Dornbosch or Kyle Platzer and Zach O'Brien and moving them up to the American League. Platzer and O'Brien currently in Bakersfield with Condors. So you see those coaches who have a real desire to develop these players, and to me, I think that's the really huge draw, other than the fact that fans can sit there and say, I watched blank player when he played in insert city here, and to me, I think that's another bonus as well, not only in the SPHL, where you can watch guys where the SPHL, I think, is the kind of the marriage of what the ECHL is now and what the old Central Hockey League was, of players coming up and going down. I think that's a perfect marriage. Here in the ECHL, it's all about players coming up and those career players who realize that their ceiling is at the top, that's as far as they're going to go.
You're listening to ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast. We're joined today by members of Team Sinbin. As far as I know, the most extensive network for coverage of all of minor league hockey at the AAA, AA, and single A levels. We're very happy to have them with us today. We're here in Indy for the All-Star Game. What do you think about? Does the All-Star Game at this level, does it serve a purpose, or what purpose does it serve? Obviously, you're recognizing guys, but, I mean, there have been, from the time the teams were first kind of put together, even before they were announced, maybe 3 weeks ago, there have been numerous changes, and most of them have to do with injuries or call-ups. And because this is in such a state of flux, do you think is there still a place for the All-Star Game? Who wants to comment? Mike?
I really hope that there is, because you look at this is great fan service. This is a huge event. You've got all these people together, all these players from all over the league, and they're here, and you have all the fans that are coming in from all different cities. And I think it's good to have that kind of special time between the fans and the players and other people around the league, coaches, equipment guys, whoever, at this kind of level. Just speaking from the perspective of the SPHL, we don't have an all-star game. We pretend to have an all-star game on paper that we've done for this is our third year of doing that, and we get a great response just from our fans when we're putting together teams on paper. So yeah, I wish the SPHL would have an all-star game. I know it's never going to happen just because of the expenses involved, and operating budgets in single A hockey is far less than in any other level. So I think it's a great service to the fans, and you love seeing people come out here and enjoying it.
I think it's the argument you make about all the call-ups. It's very similar to the same thing with the AHL All-Star Game. They're being hit with the exact same thing: injuries, call-ups. Yet their All-Star Game does really success. It's not just good; it's validation to the players. Like you're coming in, you're working your butt off day in, day out, and this is a place where you got started, and it's a good way of recognizing these players, because it's not just important for fans, it's important for players too. It makes players want to play in the league because they know that there will be some validation at the end of the day, and I think that's really important to recognize those guys too for that.
And I guess I'll just go ahead and finish, kind of piggyback on what has been said already here, and say that I think this is a great showcase of the developmental players in this league. I did prep for an hour and a half this morning, and went through each of the rosters, and I think in most of the rosters they have some junior representation, some college representation, and all of them are tied to a parent club. So I think that this is a good showcase for not only AA hockey in North America, but for the developmental process as well, to have it on a national stage and have just some panache behind it. Tony Stewart will be here, Wayne Gretzky's here. This is not a normal minor league all-star game. This is, we've kind of billed it as the ECHL's signature in-season event. We're not going to go outdoors very often, but we're going to play an all-star We're going to play an all-star game, and we're going to and when the ECHL does it, it's going to be done right. So I think that it's really just a showcase for the entire league, developmental-wise, from the player aspect, from the coaching aspect as well, because we have 3 first-time coaches, and from the league aspect to show what it can do when it has a marketing machine behind it.
Maddie, does Tony Stewart count as a first-time coach?
He's won everything else except for Daytona, so probably.
Oh, and I was going to say, it's also really good, too, I believe, for highlighting the individual markets, because ECHL fans don't always go to markets. I mean, granted, there are fans who will go to away games, but it's not like the NHL where you have players who, they'll go and watch their team on vacation somewhere. You know, if they're playing in Vegas, they'll watch them there, or go to Pittsburgh just to watch their team. This is a really spectacular way of highlighting the individual market and growing just the league itself within that market, too, and I think that's something that really can't be overlooked.
This is... I've been to, I guess this is the fourth All-Star event that I've been to, because they didn't have them for a couple of years when they were doing the hockey heritage thing for a number of different reasons, mostly logistical. But I do sense there's more kind of buzz about it in every market I go to. Every year it becomes more and more, there's more sponsorship interest, and of course now, I mean, it's on national television on NHL Network, which, you know, that's the ECHL, you know, you almost can't buy that kind of getting your product in front of true hockey fans. So, having said that, have you been around enough in Indy long enough to you know, where you see at the airport, where you see the branding and the signage at the hotel and all that other stuff? Do you get the sense that not everybody, because Indy's a pretty big town, but that there's a sense of the people are kind of maybe fired up about this?
We got into town yesterday, and as we drove in on Interstate 70, you could see signs for it, even as far west as Terre Haute. So, you know, I think the Fuel have done a really good job of branding this across the state of Indiana. And I know when Mike flew in yesterday, he said he saw signs at the airport. Here in the hotel, we have signs all over the elevators and things like that. You really can't miss this. So I think the Fuel and the ECHL have done a tremendous job of getting the word out about it. I'm eager to see what kind of local reception it gets on television. I haven't, obviously, since we've been on the ground 24 hours, we really haven't had a chance to watch a lot of television. But I'll be eager to see what happens when they get some local viewership here. But I think for the ECHL, and I want to step back and kind of comment on the NHL Network deal really quick. I would like to see more ECHL games and more American League games on the NHL Network. I really think that if we want to continue to build the brand of developmental hockey in America, that needs to be front and center. Like, you see 3 different grades of hockey, and you see players move up and down and through that rigmarole. So I would like to see more games on a national platform, not just the league showcase game, the All-Star game.
I think anybody...
Right. You know, and I think that's almost a possibility. You look at NBCSN, and they're showing Division I hockey. So it's maybe not that much of a step further to start going to, you know, AHL games, and then from there you can work it down to the ECHL.
Well, there are, I don't know, there is a limited AHL package on NHL Network, but I think just that the choice, the option to put minor league hockey on NHL Network has more to do with the people in the NHL making the decision than the people in the other leagues.
Because I'm sure whether it's Joe Babick, Ryan Creelan, or Valerie Persinger, any of those people would sign off on that in a heartbeat. You know, because that's your league, that's your baby, front and center for the world to see.
Well, they have had discussions at different times, and obviously, it wasn't anything for a while, and it's led to the point where now this is the second consecutive year where the ECHL All-Star event is going to be on telecast live on NHL Network.
Well, and especially if, you know, the Olympic model does continue to change towards where it's this movement away from NHL players, because it kind of seems like that might be the way it's going to be trending in the future too, especially with Beijing hosting the next Winter Games and that sort of evolution there. Highlighting these players that will go on to represent their teams, I think, becomes that much more appealing to the NHL Network, because, hey, that's a market where they're not fulfilling that niche anymore where it's the NHL players, but this way they can still kind of appeal to fans of Olympic hockey and get them to want to watch these players before they go out and, you know, wear the red, white, and blue, or the red and white, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay, let's take a break, and we will continue our discussion in just a minute. listening to ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Need the right words for your video, web, or print product? Have trouble finding someone to translate your concepts into ideas which will help you sell your product or service? The solution might be Double S Media. Double S Media produces content which increases awareness and sales. Go to doublesmedia.com to learn how we can help your business grow. It might be the best sales move you've ever made. Compelling content equals successful business. doublesmedia.com.
Welcome back to ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast. This is your host, Barry Schickling, and I'm joined today by a few members of Team Sinbin, the most extensive minor league coverage source, I believe. Anyway, the Team Sinbin members with us are Matthew Harding, Mike Campos, and Samantha Hoffman. Let's continue our discussion about stuff in minor league hockey that you guys ostensibly know something about. When you have, obviously, because you're putting your content out to attract fans, readers, viewers, whatever, and you get feedback from them too. Talk a little bit about the more common comments, the feedback that you get from the people who look at your stuff.
Well, if we're dealing with suspensions, there's always the good side and the bad side. You can look at the Allen Wichita pregame incident, and we heard about it for 3 days that it wasn't Allen's fault because it started on their side of the red line, and which it doesn't, So,
if that was the case, then the only teams who would ever be suspended or punished would be teams in their own defensive end, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, we heard about that, and then you hear call-ups. So, like, why do they have to take my favorite player? Why do they have to take the team's best player? What are we going to do now? And I think what we need to do better as an enterprise is educate fans on the purpose of call-ups. We don't do a good job, I think, we just tell you that player X got called up, or player Y got sent down, and we have to do a better job of giving the fans the information behind that, the backstory maybe, even though whether it's through a coach or through the organization or somebody like that, we have to do a better job of that. But those are the two most common themes that we hear all the time. And then, the obvious, as you get, I'm sure, all the time through your Twitter feed and things like that, the ostensive correction by this player's player number X, and he's playing his blank game with your team. And so, we hear that all the time. And so those are largely the hot button topics that we hear.
Actually, I never make mistakes, so we don't ever worry about that.
Oh, come on. Man, we need to have you on our team because you're flawless. We are flawed. You need to help us. There's a position open for assistant chief cook and bottle washer at Team Sinbin. We could fit you right in.
Wait. Hey, now, what, am I getting fired here?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, I'm getting an assistant.
You're getting an assistant.
Help.
Oh, God, I need that.
Well, and that was building off of what Matthew said. We were actually talking about this over dinner yesterday, that one of the biggest holes when it comes to minor league hockey coverage, whether it's at the SPHL level, the ECHL level, or even the AHL level, is that you don't have a lot of beat writers anymore for teams that normally, so they're not getting the color commentary, they're not getting the analysis of play. So when, you're live tweeting a game, don't just say blank player did this, but, like so-and-so flashed their glove and stopped a goal or that sort of thing, and building off the transaction. I actually did a piece when Jake Wallman was called up the other day, and it was a day of call just because one of the players on the Blues went out with the flu. So it was just a last-minute thing, like Wallman showed up for morning practice and then he wasn't there for the game. And I made sure after the game I talked to the player who replaced him in the lineup. I talked to the coach not only about what the absence of Wallman meant for the team and how he is as a player, but also the player filling his shoes. Because transactions aren't just about the player leaving, it's who's going to step up in their spot. And I think showing the cause and effect is something we can definitely build off of too.
You made a good point, though, about the traditional newspaper beat writer who was traditionally the best source for content from any team at the minor league level. That, well, it still exists in some places. In a lot of places, they'll have the hometown team will have the writer or the writers there for the home games, but there's certainly not the same kind of coverage, and it kind of surprises me. It doesn't surprise me, but it kind of amazes me when you see somebody taking an image from an NHL locker room, and somebody is talking, and there are 38 guys there with cameras and microphones and notepads. Yeah. And I've been to plenty of games where there's me and maybe one, or perhaps on a busy night, maybe two other people covering an ECHL game. Do you see that moving and changing, that the beat writers, such as they are, of the next generation or the next segment of time, maybe the next decade, ends up being people from our types of organizations as opposed to traditional newspapers and such like that?
I really do. The way that we see it as an organization is that as beat writers continue to fall away, like in Wichita, here's a perfect example. The newspaper beat writer, the newspaper is published in Kansas City, so the newspaper beat writer never covers the game. He always files features, and so that those are in the paper on game day, so that his stuff is always out there, but he's never around the rink at all. And that's a disservice, I think, but there's, where we see it as an organization is that we see that as filling the vacuum. And that's, I think, where we want to see, that's where the Sin Bin, I think, can see a period of great growth, is in filling those vacuums from beat writers who are no longer covering games, but rather just covering the featurey stuff. And we'll cover the featurey stuff too, but we want to be there to provide game coverage as well, and kind of give you the backstory throughout the season, rather than picking and choosing when we want to cover when to cover things. So I think that's where we're headed, and again, that's a great opportunity for J School students, established people who have their own blogs, and people who just want to cut their teeth in sports journalism. It is a very tough industry, but it is a very rewarding one once you get in there and you are able to cover events like this. Having been on the ground here for probably a day, this is incredible. This is something I never thought I'd ever cover again, but I'm blown away.
Just speaking of that, we happen to be sitting in a room which is chock full of all of the types of swag, for lack of a better term, that the participants and the sponsors and the team members and media members and all sorts of other folks are getting when they show up to check in for the All-Star event here, and it's just a tip of the iceberg of the number of the minutia of all the things the league goes through in terms of putting together one of these things. And I know some of the league staff. That's why I'm mentioning this, because we don't talk about the All-Star game very much, because it only happens once a year. But the fact that the 8 or 9 or 10 people, however many are in the league office, they spend an incredible amount of their time in the last all year, but especially in the last few months leading up to this, to make sure everything is organized. And there are crates and boxes and all sorts of bags and all sorts of stuff in this room.
We've turned couches into size racks. I'm looking at a couch now where we have anything from XXL to medium and CCM apparel on this couch. It's banners strewn over chairs. We have bags along the walls. My goodness.
Jerseys stacked up on the walls. You got players' equipment bags all over the floor.
Championship trophy in the corner.
Yeah. It's unreal.
Anyway, it's quite an undertaking, and it's amazing that you can't say enough about the fact that the people in the host team puts a lot of work into this case too. In this year, it's Indy Fuel, but the league employees, the however many there are not that many of them. They do a fantastic job of putting this all together every year. Let me ask Mike a little bit, because I'm assuming that most of the people who watch and listen to the ECHL Week show and the podcast are pretty much plugged into the ECHL, and they may know a little bit about the SPHL because a lot of guys get called up and then go back after their call-up time is done. But talk a little bit from your knowledge in how much difference and how many similarities there are in the operation and the play between the A-level SPHL and the AA level ECHL.
I think when you go about just the game and the operations of it all, it's a very similar experience between some of your SPHL markets and your ECHL markets. I mean, for example, if you go to Huntsville, Alabama, which may consistently leads the league in attendance, they have one of the most professional game operations that you're going to see, and it's an incredible thing to see out there. It'll rival any ECHL market on a consistent basis. And, you look at established hockey towns like Peoria, Illinois, and Evansville, Indiana, even Roanoke, which is now making a return to pro hockey. They're in their second year. And these are all hockey towns, even in non-traditional markets as far south as Huntsville or Pensacola or Knoxville, who's had hockey for such a long time. So these are people that have done it for a very long period of time, even as long as any other ECHL market. So the similarities are there. I think the only real difference comes in budget. You're operating in A-level hockey on a much smaller budget, and if you even go down to the Federal League, that's even far smaller budgets. I mean, that's literal nickel and dime stuff there. And it's amazing what the SPHL guys can do with so little.
And certainly in anywhere, in any endeavor, in any business, but as much in minor league hockey as anything else, there's a lot of consideration given to financial stuff. There has to be. Is there a salary cap in the SPHL?
Yes, there is. The last time that I've checked, and I know now that they've gone to 19-man rosters, I haven't gotten confirmation from SPHL President Jim Combs if the salary cap has gone up, but for the longest time it's been $5,600 a week that you spread amongst, at least before, 18 players. So it's slim pickings for the guys. However, you've got some great booster clubs out there, some great families, and I guess that's one of the things about the SPHL that kind of makes it special is, these players come into their towns, and you've got these, fantastic fans in every city that come in there, and they treat these players like they're part of the family. And, they don't worry for anything when they're in an SPHL market. It's a great place to send your kids to come play hockey for a year.
The personal touch, whether it's in the SPHL or I think in some ways in the ECHL as well in a lot of markets, I think that comes with the fact that a lot of these teams are in smaller cities or smaller towns. But that also reflects itself in the fact that sponsors aren't necessarily clamoring over one another to spend money there because they have to they're looking for their biggest bang for their buck. So money is always an issue, and the salary cap, whether it's at the SPHL or the ECHL, certainly is a big it's a big consideration of how teams do business. But it's not just about salaries too. There's a lot of other things as well. You're listening to You're not SP. You're listening to oops. You're listening to EC. I might have to edit that out.
Never make mistakes.
That's when I'm typing. Mouth, I make mistakes all the time.
He was the only one who messed up the lead.
No, you've got to stick with this.
When you're moving back and forth, it can get confusing. Anyway, you're listening to ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast, and this is Barry Schickling, and I'm talking to members of Team Sinbin who do a terrific job at covering many of the minor league hockey teams throughout North America. All right, let's move into the kind of the home stretch of the program this afternoon today, and talk a little bit about where do you think things are headed? I mean, there's been a very conscious effort, I think, from the teams and management at the league level at the ECHL of not totally copying baseball's model, because you can't really do that because there are a number of reasons you just can't. But kind of using that as a model to develop a much more defined AAA level, AA level, single A level, and that the sport as a whole benefits from that. I've seen that. I've been watching ECHL games regularly for the last 10 years, and I've seen a huge change in the last 10 years as the ECHL is in its 30th season now. Look into your crystal ball, you all, and tell me where the next 10 years goes in terms of this more defined AAA, AA, single A.
Well,
Matthew?
I think we should probably start with Samantha in the American League,
Okay.
and then we can work our way down.
Yep, you're up triple.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, obviously, the development system is going to continue to grow. It has to be. That's just a hole in hockey that they're going to continue to develop. That's not up for debate, in my opinion, because, as the NHL markets continue to grow, they're going to need more players in the pipeline, and just with the way the game's changing, you need guys who are faster, and it kind of, you can't play in the game for 20 years anymore, unless you're a Yager, or just something else. But you can't, so you need to have the talent in the pipeline. You need to have guys who are there to motivate also players to play their best, because there is always going to be somebody to step up there. And this is kind of a discussion we've been having actually lately about how the development model also needs to evolve. You need to have people who can help these guys who are making the jump from juniors or to college, and I think that's something Rocky Thompson in Chicago does a really good job with. He won the Memorial Cup last year, so he's been on every side of hockey now, and there just you need to give players the tools to be able to make that jump, because they're going from having everything planned out for them, they know where their meals are coming from, to not only having to figure out life, but they're also figuring out how to be a professional hockey player, and there needs to be people there who can help them adjust. And I think that's where the development model is going to go, and that's where it needs to go, quite frankly.
Just to clarify, Rocky Thompson is the coach for the American Hockey League Chicago Wolves. Let's take a break right in there in the middle, though, before we move more. And there is such a big of this. I mean, we talk about player development, which obviously is really significant. And, a lot of the NHL teams that hadn't previously thought about it so much are seeing the light and realizing it's a lot more cost effective for me to start a guy in the ECHL. I can sign him to a contract, I sign him there, he learns what's going on, then he moves up the ladder to the American League, he's ready. That's a lot better than paying $6 million to some free agent who, might not give you that much bang for your buck. So there's this financial aspect involved, but a lot of that at the American League level is because about half the teams in the American League level are owned by their NHL affiliate or parent club, as the case may be. So let's face it, the NHL teams have a lot of money. If you're not an NHL team, you might not necessarily have that much money, and that really can affect a lot of where things are going. So now that Samantha has talked from her standpoint, it's your turn. Your thoughts about the ECHL, Matthew?
Well, I would think in the next 10 years we will start to see the NHL re-infiltrate itself back in the ECHL. We saw it with the Edmonton Oilers in Norfolk before they sold to Mango Media Group. There are currently no ECHL teams owned by NHL clubs. I would think that we will see probably 3 to 6 maybe in the next 10 years. But I think the concern for me is not necessarily about development, although it is a concern. And Samantha did an eloquent job of describing that. The concern for me is what happens to the teams west of the Mississippi. The ECHL is fairly thin there, with losing Colorado next year and the potential of adding a franchise in St. John's. So there's, what do you do now with 7 teams west of the Mississippi River? And how do you continue to grow the AA franchise footprint west of that landmark? So that's going to be a real challenge, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years for the ECHL. Again, player development going to be right there. Making sure that the product continues to grow attendance-wise will always be an issue. But for me, the Sentinel concern is that footprint west of the Mississippi.
Having said that, and we talk about geography, which is significant, if the NHL continues to grow, they're at 31, and it certainly seems easily in the realm of possibility that 32 could be here in another couple of years. If you're talking about 32 NHL teams, and then they certainly want to have 32 American League teams, and then, in a perfect world, 32 ECHL teams, although that would probably take quite some time to achieve, and not to mention at the A level. I mean, are there enough North American markets that can support 32, 30-ish, and then however many, at the A level? I at some point, I think that's got to kind of peter out. I just don't know if for the most part, I mean, there are a couple exceptions, but for the most part, if teams could support, or cities could support teams, they'd have them now.
Yeah,
right.
So, where does that take us?
Well, I do think you have to look at non-traditional hockey markets. That's the biggest room for growth. West of the Mississippi, people thought Vegas, there's no way they would support a hockey team. And they filled out a practice the other day where they were cheering for every single player. There was standing room only in their practice rink. And I think just looking at non-traditional hockey communities and looking at growing the sport that way, that's easily the biggest opportunity for growth. So, yes, while the ECHL is trending more towards East, they need to kind of, look at the West teams. There will be a Seattle franchise. Portland, Oregon could certainly support a minor league team. And just looking at how hockey as a whole is just growing westward. And I think that's the best opportunity for growth for the sport. Now, whether it can support 32 is another level, but that's where you need to look for growth, in my opinion.
Yeah, let me just cut the whole 32-team A-level hockey. Let's just nip that in the bud right now. We're at 16 if you count the Federal Hockey League.
And I don't think you have to do that, really.
And you can see me shaking my head right now, so... so let's say there are 10 teams right now in the SPHL which are direct feeders to the ECHL. And that's well established. That's the way it is. And maybe the SPHL goes to 12 teams. I'd rather see stability in the league rather than having 2 teams added and removed every single year. Because to bring a stable base into A-level hockey, where if you have kids that age out of juniors that need to learn how to become professionals, then you have a place for that in the SPHL. And to be able to develop those guys to go up the line into AA hockey. I really kind of balk at balking to say they're going to make it all the way to the AHL or the NHL because only one player has done that so far, with Scott Darling in Carolina now. But you can also see, equipment managers and trainers and coaches and staff, ticket guys and media guys, and you're developing those players and those people as well. Ropes, God, why do I always forget his first name? I don't know. David Roper. I'm sorry. But David Roper, who started with the Louisiana Ice Gators a few years back, and then he went to Norfolk, and now he's an assistant equipment manager with the Maple Leafs. So you're not just developing players, you're developing anyone to advance in hockey.
I think, too, certainly I've had Brian McKenna, the commissioner of the ECHL, tell me that, and I don't think it's any secret, that numbers are not nearly as important as good, strong, stable franchises, good, strong teams. They want to be in markets where there's a good ownership, where there's a good building, where there's a good demographic mix, where there's enough people there to support the team. And if that's whatever number that is, whether it's 25, 27, 30, that's where they want to be.
Yeah, he's told me that several times as well. Kind of the quantity over quality, or quality. Kind of the quality over quantity battle that we face, and I think if you got Commissioner McKenna alone in a room and asked him really what he thought of Colorado maybe moving up, I think he'd tell you he'd be a little proud of that. A club that started in the Central Hockey League, moved up and developed in the ECHL, won a championship, and now has reached their ceiling and have to move up to the American League. And I think if that is a model for franchises in the ECHL, then Brian McKenna has done a hell of a job with the Colorado Eagles in helping develop that model.
And it's not just, as we talked about, players, coaches, support staff, front office people moving up the ladder in the tiers of minor league hockey. Teams have done it too. Cities have done it too. And we've seen that in numerous occasions in the ECHL. Charlotte was in the ECHL. Now it's a good, strong, successful American League franchise. And there have been any number of them. So at every level, including at the team level, there's that, it's a developmental league. We kind of joke about that a lot of times. And, it's a developmental league. But it's very true at every level. And I don't, except maybe the fans. I don't know if fans need to develop. Fans are happy where they are, and they should be. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's just kind of wrap and pull this all together, wrap this thing up right now, and say what, as far as this season is concerned. Let's talk about. Let's go around and talk about your individual leagues. We'll talk about the SPHL first. Who's good? Who's going to win?
And I've got 4 seconds to think about this right now. The parity in the SPHL is extremely good right now. I could go between either the Pensacola Ice Flyers, Macon Mayhem, Peoria Rivermen, even Huntsville Havoc right now, as any of those teams could probably take home the President's Cup. If I had a dark horse, it would be the Knoxville Ice Bears. Jeff Carr, who used to be an assistant with the Utah Grizzlies last year, he's doing a heck of a job at pulling that team together in a short deal. So yeah, there we go.
Okay, nicely done. I appreciate that, Mike, on the spot. Good to know. We're going to go to the American League first because this is an ECHL program. We see the best for last. Your thoughts?
I got 14 seconds to answer.
If I'm going to be honest with you, the SPHL right now is... Or not the SPHL.
Yes, it is.
I did it.
Yes, it is.
The AHL has been really interesting, honestly, in the last couple of weeks because, you have teams like Chicago, and obviously that's my biggest exposure is to the Wolves because I'm in the press box every home game. They went 14 straight games with points. They went from being worst in the league to being number 2 in their division. And there are all these teams right now making runs. And then Manitoba's lost 3 out of their 4 last games, I believe. And they were at the top of the league. They were on a run for a month and a half without losing a game. But then you have Providence, too. So I think The biggest thing to me is how many of these players will still be here come playoffs, because everybody knows once that roster limit gets lifted in the NHL level, guys get called up from the American Hockey League. So how many guys are going to be, how many guys are the Bruins going to pull from Providence that's going to make a change? Is Detroit just going to let the Griffins roster stand as it is because they didn't make the playoffs last year? So can the Griffins repeat? I really don't know, to be honest, because it's so dependent on what happens at the NHL level. I think you could see a bunch of teams make a run for it in the end. And yes, there are definitely teams that are wholly out already. The Cleveland Monsters aren't 500. There's a lot of teams that aren't 500 anymore, and you're halfway through the season. Cut your losses at this point, but I don't know. I can't tell you.
I think there's pretty good analysis regardless. And we won't, one of the big issues we didn't even talk about, because one of those things you can talk is rosters. And, well, we just won't even go there in terms of the rosters flexibility, because there are enough guys getting called up and sent down and hurt and all that other stuff to begin with. But, Matthew, your quick take on what to look for in the second half of the ECHL season.
Well, as we sit here at the All-Star break, it is Florida and Colorado, the lead dogs in the Eastern and Western Conference. Colorado overall was 60 points. Those two are probably going to be locks to make at least the second round of the playoffs. There are battles to be had. I'm curious in the Eastern Conference to see what happens with Brampton in the second half of the season. It looks like they've gone on a little bit of a slide here of late. Whether it's just time for Colin Chalk to make wholesale changes and move players, or if they're going to continue to ride that wave up there. For me, since I'm around the team almost every day, the turnaround that Malcolm Cameron has had with the Wichita Thunder is a story that has not been told very well in the league this year. Wichita is already equaled and bested their win total from last season. They are on pace to be a 86 to 90 point team, which would be one of the larger turnarounds in ECHL history. And I think if Coach Cameron gets the Thunder to the playoffs, he deserves significant consideration for ECHL Coach of the Year. So that's going to be a story to watch. Also, the Quad City Mallards. Everybody thought going into the season that would be a team that could contend for a playoff berth, if not a Central Division title. The Mallards right now scuffling, and that puts it lightly. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that, whether they let Phil Axtell continue to sit there and be the head coach, or if they go out and get a more proven head coach like Larry Corville or somebody like that to come in and take the reins over in the Quad Cities. So a lot of storylines to talk about in the second half of the ECHL season, but I, for one, am looking forward to covering playoff hockey in Wichita in late April.
Yeah, don't forget St. John's as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, if people are interested in keeping track of everything that all you guys are doing, all you and your others, let's let our listeners know where they should go to get the Team Sinbin lowdown.
Well, you can visit thesinbin.net. We have content there all the time, and we also have the Sinbin app, which is available through download in the Apple iTunes store as well as Google Play stores. That is a very, very good app. Mike Crook did a very good job developing that for us this year, our Rapid City Rush writer. So full marks to Mike for developing a very user-friendly app during the off-season in a very short period of time, I might add. For everything else, our social media guru can tell you about where you can find us on the rest of the social media platforms.
So Facebook, we have both an SPHL Facebook page if you want more just focused SPHL content, and that's the Sinbin-SPHL.
Yeah, or Facebook.com/SinbinSPHL.
And then the Sinbin itself also has a Facebook account where you will see all of our writing from our AHL writers and our ECHL writers with photo galleries. Then there's also @Sinbin News on Twitter, and each individual writer also is in charge of monitoring and posting content to their own individual account. So if you want to follow a team, just look up Sinbin and the mascot for that team. And if you love photography, follow @Sinbin photos on Instagram, where we are posting content from all across our leagues, all our photographers from essentially everywhere, sometimes with witty captions, sometimes just highlights of games.
Right, and even from our SPHL side, we do the same thing. I mean, my personal Twitter is at SinBinSPHL on Twitter, and then there's, SinBin_Marksman, SinBin Bolts, and SinBin everybody. Yeah, if there's a hockey mascot, we have a SinBin name in front of it.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining us. It was enlightening and good to hear from you, and it's nice to one more thing.
Yeah, you can follow me. I'm at Sinbin Thunder. It's not very hard to find me at all on the Twitters. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Barry. I just want to say thank you very much, Barry, for extending the invitation to us. We all pull from the same. We all work from on the same side of the rope, so it's good to finally put a face with the name thank you very much for the work you've done with ECHL Week. The ECHL Week podcast is a very good listen, so thank you very much for all the work you've done, and hopefully we can continue to do this in the future.
And it'll be even better to listen to now, right?
Yes, it will.
Matthew Harding, Mike Campos, Samantha Hoffman of Team Sinbin, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. And thank you for listening to the ECHL Week podcast, ECHL Week Speak. We'll talk to you next time.
ECHL Week Speak, the ECHL Week podcast, is brought to you by Double S Media, a communications content company driven by quality customer service. Find them at doublesmedia.com. Join us next time for more talk about hockey's premier AA League on ECHL Week Speak.